I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift,
The Lifestyle Medicine podcast where we dive into the science of health and well-being. Hello, brother Simon. How are you doing on the other side of the planet?
Doing very well, Professor Morton.
Very nice to hear.
Very well. Very well.
I have.
Can I just say?
Yeah.
It's glorious summer here.
Well, here I am in a fleece lining, so I don't like to hear that story. I have been still surfing, but I tell you what, it gets very. Yeah, I'm been surfing through the winter, but it's not pleasant, that initial hit the water. And my wetsuit, I've got this full length wetsuit, obviously, that we need to wear this time of year, and it's got they're meant to have sealed seams in them, but they're starting to get little leaks, and I don't like little leaks in winter time. Not pleasant at all. But anyway.
Yeah. Which reminds me, our listeners won't know this, of course, but I happen to know that you did go surfing quite recently. In fact, with your brother, and the reason for that is that it was your birthday. So happy birthday, even if it's a little bit late.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that I get so excited about birthdays nowadays.
Good. I thought you were going to say you don't get so excited about surfing with your brother, but
I do that. I get excited about surfing
if he's listening to this.
Yeah, exactly. No, love you, bro. It's great fun. Let's do more of it. Yeah. Hey, speaking of, actually, I've just preempted. I was going to ask you some quiz questions, and the first question, they're IQ tests questions, believe it or not. But the first one, I've already. The theme that we've been running with, it's going to make it a whole lot easier because you're already. This is a little bit preempted. But first question: what goes up but never comes down?
What goes up but never comes down? Your age.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Well done. So that was a bit of a prompt there, and it's a bit of a depressing fact. But anyway, we're getting so much wiser that it doesn't really matter. All right, here's another one for you then. What is always coming but never arrives?
The future. No, the future does arrive.
Close.
What's always coming but never arrives?
You're on the right path.
Tomorrow, the future.
Tomorrow, there you go. You just got that.
Tomorrow. Oh, okay.
It's tomorrow. There's always a tomorrow.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Yes. Well done. Okay, I'm giving you 2 out of 2 so far. Okay. You are outstanding. Right?
So I'm pretty smart.
You are smart. There was never a doubt in my mind. But, so here's the third one. You ready? Yeah. So there is a 4-walled house, and every wall faces south. Each wall has a window in it. And then all of a sudden, a bear comes charging through one of those windows. The question is, what color is the bear? Was that confusing or what?
There is a 4-walled house. Every wall faces south. Every wall has a window.
Yes.
And a bear charges through one of those windows. What color is the bear?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure the answers are not your age or tomorrow.
That's correct.
Beyond that, I have no idea.
Really? I thought you would have got this. I had every confidence there.
Oh, okay. Well, let me think. What color is the bear? There are 4 walls. So maybe I should be picking up on something about 4 walls that all. Oh.
Here we go. The pennies dropped.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. The pennies dropped. Okay. So the bear is white because it's a polar bear, because the only place that you could have 4 walls all facing south is the North Pole.
Simon Matthews, top of the class. You just got 3 out of 3 of these IQ test questions correct, which means that obviously you have some phenomenally high IQ score. Let's not even try to match 3. That's correct. Well, this is an interesting thing because these the IQ tests started to emerge, back in the beginning of the last century. And there was great excitement around them because what we started to think is that, hey, we had a way of identifying who the clever ones were amongst us. And obviously, it's the smart ones. It's these people who have this great ability to think things through that are going to be outstanding successes in life. And so this whole idea of IQ started to really capture on. And for those, don't know the backstory, if you have an IQ, when you do these tests, and you can do them online, you get a score of 100, that's considered to be average. Ideally, you don't want to go below 100, but if you start to get up into sort of the 140 range for your IQ, then you're considered to be in that sort of genius category. I think the highest recorded is around about 195, so pretty clever processing ability, human right there. Here's the interesting thing. Lewis Turnman was a researcher from Stanford back in the 1920s, and you're probably familiar with some of his work, but what he did, he said, you know what, this whole IQ thing is the be-all and end-all. And so let's go around America and identify kids that have this really high levels of IQ, these genius status. And so they did this. Actually, these national, statewide and national-wide surveying, and they identified he was hoping to get 1,000 kids with IQs above 140. He actually got 1,444. And what he said is, let's now launch this longitudinal study where we'll explore what happens to these kids and the outstanding success that they will certainly be. And so they started to follow them through. And what do you think they found, Simon? What do you reckon? Do you think these kids, these high, the study was called the genetic study of genius. What do you reckon? What do you reckon happened to these kids?
Well, I'm pretty confident in saying that what they found was that IQ alone was not a great predictor of future success.
It's interesting. In fact, what they found is that there were some kids in that cohort. In fact, it was Lewis Turnman that led the study, and they called the kids the Terminites. So these little Terminites went off and did their thing. But what they found is some of them, the little Terminites, did some great stuff. They were innovators,
as you would expect.
As you'd expect, they were CEOs and all the rest of it. But the vast majority of them were pretty average. And average is great. They were functioning members of their society. There was actually a significant proportion that, by all accounts and by most metrics that we would apply, actually flunked out in life. Didn't do that great at all. And it was actually Lewis Turnman who'd almost preempted that this was just going to be we'll see the amazing things and the difference that high IQ makes. And what they found is that pretty much there wasn't this strong correlation. He was a bit dejected. You actually read his work, and it's almost like this dejected tone to like, oh, that didn't work kind of thing. And so it was really interesting.
So it's worth adding a couple of things at this point. The first is just a brief word on the origin of IQ tests. And the very first IQ test was developed by a Frenchman named Alfred Binet, Binet. Its modern version is called the Stanford Binet IQ test.
Yes.
But interestingly, the original IQ test was developed at the behest of the French government at the end of the 19th century, so before 19 something, because the French government was interested in identifying students with learning disabilities and providing additional educational support to them. And interestingly, even in the example you gave, we can see how quickly the tide kind of turned, and IQ tests began to be used for other purposes. And I'll say, maybe nefarious is too strong a word, but certainly the history of IQ tests, I don't think we can say is entirely honourable. So they've been used to exclude, to discriminate. And one of the major criticisms, of course, of IQ tests is that they're very culturally bound.
Yes.
So an example that I'm familiar with is there's a lot of there's several questions related in some IQ tests related to sorting and identifying geometric shapes, triangles, pentagons, and so on. But if you've grown up, for example, in an Indigenous community in a naturalistic setting where you simply do not ever encounter those shapes,
Yeah.
then those questions are going to be very difficult to respond to. And does
Yeah.
that mean you're not as intelligent as someone
Yeah.
who, clearly not? So there are certainly some challenges here with IQ tests. The other thing that I want to add
Well,
to
I
the
actually,
term.
sorry,
Oh,
just
yeah,
to
go
just to
on.
jump in on that point, that the biased nature of IQ. It's interesting. Lewis Terman, one of his intent was actually to demonstrate that certain races were superior to others in the
Yeah,
process. And in fact, if you
yeah,
look at his Termanites, over 95% of them were white kids.
yeah,
So
yeah.
there was that bias in there.
So it's an uncomfortable and inglorious history
Mm, mm,
for IQ tests. An interesting, I won't say it's a parallel, but there was I think, BBC TV series which began, I want to say, in the 1960s, although I'm not sure. Listeners can look it up pretty easily. It's called the Up series, UP, Up.
yes. Mm,
The very first episode was called 7 Up, and then it went 14, 21, and so on. And I'm pretty sure they got as far as 63 up. And the premise was that the producers took a group of roughly 20 school-aged children, who I think at that time were aged about 10 years old for the first one, and then interviewed them every 7 years through the course of their lives, to sort of qualitatively examine what they were doing, what had gone on, what they made of all of that, and so on. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating series. Not directly related to IQ, but certainly picking up on that kind of developmental
mm.
aspect, or that developmental edge that we're talking about here.
Mm. Yeah, well, those sorts of studies, including Lewis Terman studies, really the culmination of what we were discovering, and these lack of correlations between IQ and sort of life success, if you wanted to label it that, sort of saw this emergence. And I think one of the landmark publications in this place was a book written by Daniel Goleman, and he did his work in the 1990s, and it was actually called Emotional Intelligence: Why It Matters More Than Why EQ matters more than IQ. And I really love this book. And I think what he highlighted in this book is that probably IQ contributes about 20% to your life success, but across, in most sort of domains of your life. And so which begs the question, and by the way, I think that's a really, just yesterday, and this is what prompted this podcast topic, is I actually went out to the local high school and spoke to the senior students, a class actually of Mandy Hill, who produces this podcast, but spoke to her students about this very topic. And, one thing I think that's super encouraging about this message is that we in schools, we place so much emphasis on, how you're doing with your exams and what's your scores, and we rank this. And what the message that's not conveyed effectively enough, I don't think, is, yes, do your best. There's real value in growing that, and disciplining yourself and doing the best that you're able with the facilities that you have. But your scores and your IQ actually matters relatively little. If you've got a high IQ, good for you. I'm sure that will open up some opportunities and pathways, but it's the estimate 20% to your overall life success, which begs the question, or what's the other part? What's the 80%? And this is where, Daniel Goleman, just to recap really quick, he highlights, things like it was, the researchers were finding things like the Marshmallow test. And I know that most people have heard of the Marshmallow test, where they put a kid in a room, say, here you go, here's a marshmallow, sit that in front of you. You can eat that now if you like, but if you wait till I get back, I'll give you two. And I'll give you two. And you probably, I don't know if you've seen the video footage of these experiments. It's so cute. Some of the kids, it's like, it's gone. Bonk, donk.
Yeah.
It's like before the person's, even got to the door.
Before the door's even closed. Yeah.
But there's other kids that would have their eyes closed, and then every now and then they'd sneak a peek, and then others would turn around and sing to themselves, but they keep checking that it was still there. And obviously what they found is that, and you'll be able to explain this from a psychological perspective, but the kids that have this ability to delay gratification actually were really set up well for success in other areas of their life. Maybe you'd like to comment on the mechanism, how that manifests as they journey through their life
Yeah, it's an
experience.
interesting question, and it speaks in part, and I will say that EQ is not the major area of my work and research focus. I consider myself very much a learner in that area, but one of the mechanisms does seem to speak to the idea of being able to build out a longer term plan that
Yes.
doesn't involve the immediate satisfaction of a desire. So there's a couple of interesting things to dig into here. One is to separate desires and needs, and we often conflate those in our daily lives. There are some things that we absolutely need. We need air to breathe. We need water to drink. Do we need shelter? I guess at times we need shelter. We don't even. I mean, do you need water to drink right now? No, you can get by for the next hour or 2 hours. You can even get by for a day without drinking water. You won't feel great, but you can get by without it. Air you cannot do without. You cannot be deprived of air for any appreciable amount of time. So part of what seems to underlie this is the ability to tease apart desire and need. And the second part, I guess, connects at some level with the calculus of values. So interestingly, we put a positive spin on this. We talk about those kids as kids who are able to delay gratification, which we see as an honourable thing, a good thing. Maybe these kids are just greedy. They wanted 2 marshmallows when one would have been enough.
Lift is supported by the Lift Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The Lift Project is lifting lives around the globe, in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
Broadly speaking, I think we always need to be, in any research, we always need to be careful about the conclusions that we draw about things, and to be open to the possibility that there is always more than one explanatory factor for what we're seeing, or almost always more than one explanatory factor. But interestingly, this, in behavioural change terms, this is something that we aim to cultivate, a capacity not to leap to the satisfaction of or an immediate kind of desire, or to jump straight away into a strategy, but to pause for a moment and consider a longer term picture, to consider, so I'm saying to myself, I want to lose weight. Why? Why do I want to lose weight? What do I want to be able to do that I can't do now when I've lost weight? How will losing weight improve my life? What will that add for me as a person? In what ways will my life improve? And when we can pause the immediate leap into the strategy and start to consider the future, we're often setting up the opportunity to influence the ecosystem around us much more strongly. And I think this might be part of the mechanism here, that if we leap for that first marshmallow and grab it, there's nothing different about anything other than the marshmallow is now no longer on the plate and it's in our stomach. Beyond that, everything is the same. But if we're able to engage in practices and processes which mean that we wait, we're starting to influence other things. We're starting to, for example, tolerate ambiguity. Think about those kids who, turned around and closed their eyes and then would look back to check the marshmallow was there. Why? Because they're not sure, but they're prepared to tolerate the uncertainty about whether the marshmallow is or isn't there for long enough to see what might emerge. So as we start to train ourselves to do those things, we start to think about the longer term payoff. We I think also start to develop more self-efficacy, develop a sense that there are some elements of our ecosystem that we can influence and harness ultimately for our own benefit. Interestingly, a lot of people do this, not everyone, but a lot of people do this in other areas of life anyway. Anyone who's ever had a mortgage is basically doing the marshmallow experiment. Every month, your boss pays money into your bank account. What are your options? You can go and spend it all right now, or you can deposit it in your mortgage account and watch that kind of mortgage balance come down, knowing that ultimately you're going to own a house, even though you didn't get to spend that money on marshmallows.
Well, I'm very challenged by that, a little anecdote, because I actually remember reading this book by Daniel Goleman, and it was sort of in the 90s, and I got my first job, my first full-time job ever in the 90s. I just spent 6 years at university doing this university student poor thing, and I remember I got my first position, and after the first fortnight, I received the first paycheck. And I was, wow, look at this. I've never seen these sorts of numbers before. And do you know what I did? I bought
a hang glider.
No, I bought a brand new surfboard because I'd never had a brand new surfboard. And I paid the first half, because that's all I had enough for a new mountain bike. And then I remember going home that night and thinking, hey, wait a sec. I need to actually eat for the next fortnight until the next paycheck comes. So it was, by and large, I'm actually, I think, pretty good at delaying gratification and managing that aspect of my emotional world. But that stands out as a time when I wasn't quite so. But Daniel Goleman,
this is why parents were invented, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
I
moved away from home.
Bring up the rentals and say, "Oh, I've got no money for food."
That's right. Yep, I'm learning that from the other side nowadays. But Daniel Goleman, he basically says, emotional intelligence, if there's sort of two domains to it. One is how we relate to ourselves. And he speaks about the idea of how we recognize emotions in ourselves, how we can manage emotions in ourselves, and how we can essentially motivate ourselves. And obviously, those two sides to that coin. One is motivating yourself to do things you don't want to do, and the second one is demotivating yourself from doing the things that you would like to do that you know aren't helpful. Delaying the gratification piece. And it makes me think that whole idea of how we manage ourselves, recognizing emotions, managing our emotions. There's a whole lot that lifestyle medicine and positive psychology contribute to that. I'm thinking the whole practice of mindfulness, and then all of those staples, the pillars of lifestyle medicine, like nutrition and physical activity. These are all things, and sleep, that play into how we manage our emotional states as well. So there's, that I think there's this really nice connection between this thing we sort of call emotional intelligence, and this. And lifestyle medicine and positive psychology. It has nice relation to the one aspect of positive, emotional intelligence is how we manage ourselves. But then the other aspect is how we relate to and manage other people. And this is where Daniel Goleman, he actually talks about, this is where I suppose the truly gifted aspect of emotional intelligence comes in, where we have this ability to see other people, to actually tune in to how they're feeling. And then the truly gifted ones are those that can actually come along and do something about that, hopefully for good. Obviously, there are some people that are gifted and can use that for evil as well, and drag others down with it. But he tells this little story in the book about little Timmy, and the researchers are watching kids interact in the preschool playground. And there's this kid that falls off a slide and hurt their arm, and is crying and rubbing their arm. And little Timmy almost from the other side of the playground, looks over and then quickly rushes over to this little kid's aid, and he starts rubbing, his shoulder as well, and the kid's not consoled by that. So Timmy's looking around for other solutions, and then he runs over to the like play equipment and toys box, and he grabs one, he brings it back, and he's trying to distract this kid who's still crying and rubbing, not consoled by that. So then Timmy looks around and eventually goes over and takes the hand of one of the other parents and brings them over. And what they find when they watch Timmy as he progresses through his life course, Timmy's the class president. Timmy's the popular kid that everyone likes. And because everyone likes him, he gets given some opportunities in his career. And next thing, he gets a leg step up and a leg up. And he, by what we consider most, accounts, he lives a successful life. And I find this really interesting because this kind of thing is teachable. We know that, and to a large extent, if we're talking about what we should be preparing our young people to be able to do in their education, and this is why it warms. In fact, next week I'm heading off to China to, looking at education over there and how we can start to incorporate social and emotional learning, which is essentially teaching emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And what we know is that these skills, they're entirely learnable, and if they contribute sort of 80% to life success and IQ is the 20%, why in school land are we so fixated and concerned on that sort of growing intelligence and getting people to be able to think and neglecting this other aspect of it? I think I'd love to see a greater emphasis, and it's happening, and it sort of sits under that well-being space as well. And so, schools are starting to adopt this, but I think it can't happen quick enough.
Yeah.
This whole idea of, how we can teach emotional intelligence to our young people.
Yeah. We're fixated on a lot of things in school land, I think, that don't match up that well to the available evidence we have. So this is one example. Another very well-known example, of course, is school start times. We make kids go to school, particularly adolescents. We make adolescents start school at 8:30 in the morning. From a biological perspective, we know that simply doesn't align with the dominant sleep schedule for adolescents, and in school districts, particularly, I'm aware of a couple in the US, one in, I want to say, St. Paul, Minnesota, and the other one in neighbouring Minneapolis. There are a couple that stand out. Modifications have been made to the school start time, so it's sort of pushed back by about 3 hours. So instead of school starting at 8:30, it maybe starts at 10:30 or 11 or something. And in those school districts, everything changes. The students are nicer. They're more amenable. The schools are kept tidier. Work is handed in more on time. Families report, better family life, etc., etc., etc. So there's a bunch of things that we still do in schools that I think, in fact, inadvertently perhaps hold us back. And it's not till we have the good fortune to get out of the school system that we can really start to get educated, as it were.
Yeah, I agree.
Years ago, when I took we took our young boys, how old were they? 15 and 12, I think. We took them to Eastern Europe for 6 weeks. It was 15 years ago, and we took them during school term time. So we took them out of school. They missed 6 weeks of school, and I said at the time, and my younger son now repeats it frequently, never let school get in the way of a good education.
Yeah, that's good. It's good. It's true. I agree. I think, and look, there's, thankfully there's some real thought leadership and creative minds going into how we look at education and how we do education. And my honest opinion is, I think education is about to radically change with AI coming in. I think that this emphasis on knowing and rote learning is going to radically change. And what is going to be the most essential skills, I believe, that young people are going to need to be successful is actually this emotional intelligence stuff, because that's the stuff
Yeah.
that AI won't be able to replicate. And so when I was chatting with the students yesterday, I said to them, you know what? This is my experience, is that young people are getting worse at this because we're not engaging with others. We're on our phones. We're not good at connecting with other people. And I shared two quick stories. One, I went skiing a couple of years ago, and I got on the lift. And as I sat down on the lift, I was by myself. I was getting the last couple of runs for the day, and there were two young people there. And it was a windy day, and we all had our balaclavas on. But I heard this young fella sitting next to me say, "Hi, sir, how are you?" And I turned and I said, "Oh, I'm really well. How are you?" And he says, "Oh, I'm great. Where are you from?" And this he was in year 10, as it turned out. So, junior in high school. He was just having this conversation. He was asking questions about me. He seemed to have a genuine interest in what I was doing. And at the end, he said, "Oh, I'm actually a bit interested in that area." And I handed him my phone number and I said, "If you need ever to any help, or if I can give you some advice or give you a leg up, you just don't hesitate to give me a call." And I shared with the students that, isn't it interesting? We have interactions all day, every day, and yet that interaction with that young person 2 years ago stands out to me to this day because it's so atypical.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said to them, you actually lived, this is a message I'd love young people to know, is that you live in an environment now where you can have a great head start. You can be head and shoulders above simply by being curious about other people, by showing an interest in other people, making other people feel good about themselves, right? Because people like people who make them feel good about themselves. And so I think I'd love this message for young people to hear this. And I shared one last story. My son, my youngest son, Caleb, he's always been a good conversationalist. And I would say he actually has a very high EQ, just naturally. And even as a little tacker, he would go and talk with older people. And this is the other thing. I think there's this real loss of intergenerational, connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, he just the other day, I got a message from the school, and they were trying to track down Caleb. And I said, "Oh yeah, what's this all about?" And they said, "Well, it's a long story, but here it is. Caleb works at a sports store, right, called Athlete's Foot, which is, he puts shoes on people." Yeah. He was serving a customer. When he does this, he's genuinely interested in them. And he's, "Oh, what do you do? Tell me a bit about that." And there's a genuine curiosity. Anyway, it turns out that he had actually served a CEO of a business firm in Sydney. And Caleb had asked him lots of questions, and in the process had mentioned that he was planning on studying business too. And he asked some questions. Anyway, this particular individual had heard that he went to this particular school, and they were offering an internship at his workplace. So he got his PA to contact the school to say, "Do you know who the kid is?
Find this kid.
Find this kid." And then they contacted me. And I said to these young people, I said, "You know what? The power of this is just a simple act of curiosity and reaching out and being genuinely interested in other people, particularly people that are not your age." Right? And there's value to, engaging with people your age, but people that are older, people that are younger. And what happens is things are remarkable things.
Yeah.
And so, I said to young people, and I'd love them to know, young people to know, that this is a simple skill that we can learn. And I know you teach this. This is your bread and butter, teaching people to be curious about others. And that's a fundamental, as I see it, skill of emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And it can go such a long way.
As we're talking about this, I'm thinking, it's almost like by our very nature, and perhaps in what we might call traditional communities or traditional societies, and by that I simply mean communities that haven't been heavily industrialized. We don't all walk around with smartphones and college degrees and so on. But in historical settings, it feels like the conditions for developing emotional intelligence almost just form part of the fabric or the background. And what we do is introduce structures like formal school education with grades and report cards and focus on achieving this and achieving that, and they kind of push out EQ.
Yes.
So we end up, in a sense, almost focused on the wrong things. Once you leave school, you kind of have to unlearn some of that, and then relearn the stuff that that is going to help. Unless you happen to be fortunate and have parents like this guy Caleb that you're talking about.
So fortunate. Just asking.
So my younger son, who's now 27 or about to turn 27, when he got his first job, it was actually his apprenticeship. So he's a trade qualified engineer, and during somewhere during his apprenticeship, I can't remember exactly where, he came home one day and he said, I've realised that there are two things that are valuable. One is being smart and one is being nice.
Mm.
And if you're really smart, you don't have to be so nice. And if you're really nice, you don't have to be so smart. But you can't miss out on both. You've got to have one of them. You've got to be either smart or nice.
That's interesting. I finished the presentation with these senior students yesterday, and I said, I don't want to be interpreted that I'm saying don't study, don't try hard in those areas, because there's actually a whole lot of value, including that delaying gratification and having to do hard stuff and all the rest of it that goes along with that. And certainly it opens doors for you. But I think for me, the really important message is, if you've been gifted with a high IQ, that's great. Even if you haven't, work hard in that and do your best, but realize that it's actually EQ. It's how we manage ourselves. It's how we relate to and manage other people is actually the golden ticket in many ways to experiencing success in so many other domains of our life. And I think, for our listeners, I would love for them to share that message with young people, because I think it's a hopeful message, and certainly it's so integral and to lifestyle medicine. I see this really powerful connection.
And if we prioritize or privilege these ideas in lifestyle medicine, then I think ultimately we're equipping patients and clients to be able to further develop things like self-regulation, self-awareness, social awareness, all of these things that really do support not only behavioural change, but also support experiencing, a pleasant and thriving life and lifestyle.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
Well said.
Now, I know that you're not such a fan of marshmallows, but you do like chocolate.
Mm.
So here's my offer. I'm going to send you, probably via FedEx or DHL or something, a block of chocolate. And if 1 month from now, you can show me that block of chocolate is unopened, I'll send you another one.
Game on, brother. Game on. Good on you.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.